The scream pierced the evening air like a knife, echoing across the canyon, as Sophia Valenti dangled precariously over the edge of Widow's Bluff, her fate hanging by the tenuous grip of a stranger's hand. Her attacker's boot prints still visible in the disturbed dirt behind her, the last rays of sunset illuminating her terrified face as she looked up at her unexpected savior. Vincent Hawkins had been tracking a wounded stag when he heard the commotion, and arrived just in time to see a hulking figure shove the young woman over the precipice. Without hesitation, Vincent had lunged forward, his body sliding along the rocky ground as his arm shot out over the cliff's edge, catching her wrist in the final moment before gravity could claim her. "Hold on," Vincent shouted, his voice strained as he fought to maintain his grip on both the woman and the edge of the cliff. The attacker had fled, disappearing into the darkening wilderness, but Vincent couldn't spare a thought for pursuit now, not with this woman's life literally in his hands. Silver Reef, Utah Territory, 1878, was no place for the faint of heart. The silver mining boom had brought prosperity to some, desperation to others, and danger to all. Vincent had seen plenty of that danger during his years working as both a miner and occasional deputy, when Sheriff Miller needed an extra gun. But nothing had prepared him for the sight of this woman's amber eyes staring up at him, filled with equal measures of terror and desperate hope. "Please," Sophia gasped, her free hand scrabbling uselessly against the sheer rock face. "Don't let me fall." Vincent's muscles screamed in protest as he braced himself against the rocky ground. "Not planning on it, madam," he grunted, his voice betraying none of the strain he felt. "Just need you to stay calm while I pull you up." With agonizing slowness, Vincent managed to strengthen his position, digging his boots into the dirt for leverage as he began to haul Sophia upward. The cliff wasn't a sheer drop, perhaps 80 feet to the rocky riverbed below, but it was more than enough to kill anyone unlucky enough to fall. When Sophia's other hand finally reached the edge, she scrambled to help, her fingers digging into the earth as Vincent pulled her the rest of the way. They collapsed together in an exhausted heap, several feet from the cliff's edge, both breathing heavily. "Thank you," Sophia whispered, her voice trembling as much as her body. The evening air was cooling rapidly, and Vincent noticed her thin cotton dress provided little protection against the chill. Vincent removed his worn leather jacket and draped it over her shoulders. "What happened? Who was that man?" he asked, scanning the surrounding area for any sign of the attacker's return. Sophia pulled the jacket tighter around herself, grateful for its residual warmth. "His name is Floyd Decker. He works for Malcolm Reeves." She spat the name like it was poison on her tongue. Vincent's jaw tightened. Malcolm Reeves owned the largest mine in Silver Reef, along with most of the businesses in town. His wealth and power gave him the impression he was above the law. "Why was he trying to kill you?" Sophia looked away, her long brown hair falling forward to hide her face. "I refused Mr. Reeves' proposal. He doesn't take rejection well." Vincent helped her to her feet, keeping a supportive hand at her elbow. "Let's get you to town. Sheriff Miller needs to hear about this." "It won't matter," Sophia said bitterly. "The sheriff is in Reeves' pocket just like everyone else." "Not everyone," Vincent countered, his voice hardening. "Come on. My cabin's not far. You can rest there tonight, and tomorrow we'll figure out what to do." The walk to Vincent's cabin was slow and careful. Every few minutes, he would pause, listening for pursuit, his hand never straying far from the Colt revolver at his hip. Sophia moved with impressive determination despite her ordeal, though Vincent noticed her favoring her right ankle. "It's just ahead," Vincent said as they crested a small rise. His cabin sat nestled among a stand of ponderosa pines, the simple structure barely visible in the darkness. A thin wisp of smoke still rose from the chimney, the remains of the morning's fire. Inside, Vincent quickly stoked the embers and added fresh wood, bringing the fire back to life. The cabin was modest but clean, with a main room containing a table, 2 chairs, and a small cooking area. A doorway led to what Sophia presumed was a bedroom. "It's not much," Vincent said, suddenly self-conscious of his humble dwelling, "but it's warm and safe." "It's perfect," Sophia replied, sinking gratefully into one of the wooden chairs. "I can't thank you enough, Mr. Hawkins, Vincent Hawkins, but most folks just call me Vince." "Sophia Valenti," she replied, offering her hand. "I'm pleased to meet you, Mr. Hawkins, despite the circumstances." Vincent shook her hand gently, struck by how soft it was compared to the calloused hands of most women in these parts. "What brings you to Silver Reef, Miss Valenti? You don't strike me as someone who's lived here long." "I arrived 6 months ago," she explained, watching as Vincent moved to prepare some coffee. "My father died last year, leaving me with little choice but to accept my aunt's invitation to join her here. She runs the millinery shop on Main Street." "Madame Claire's your aunt?" Vincent asked, surprised. The elegant Frenchwoman was well respected in town, known for her exquisite hats and discreet nature. "Yes, she's been wonderful to me, teaching me the trade." Sophia's expression darkened. "That's how I met Reeves. He came in to purchase a hat for his sister's birthday and took an interest in me. He's been persistent ever since, despite my refusals. And tonight," Sophia shuddered. "Tonight he said he was tired of waiting. He had Decker follow me after I left the shop. I tried to take the long way home, thinking I'd lost him, but—" Her voice faltered. "You don't need to talk about it now," Vincent assured her, placing a mug of hot coffee in her hands. "Get some rest. You can take the bed, I'll keep watch out here." "I couldn't possibly take your bed, I insist," Vincent said firmly. "I've slept in worse places than my own floor." After some further protest, Sophia finally relented. Vincent gave her one of his clean shirts to sleep in and showed her to the small bedroom. Once the door closed behind her, he moved a chair near the window, his rifle across his lap, and settled in for a long night. Vincent wasn't sure what time it was when he heard the soft whimpers coming from the bedroom. He hesitated, uncertain whether to intrude, but when the sounds intensified into a strangled cry, he couldn't ignore them any longer. He knocked gently. "Miss Valenti, are you all right?" When no answer came, but the distressed sounds continued, Vincent cautiously opened the door. Sophia was tangled in the blankets, her face contorted in fear, clearly in the grip of a nightmare. "No, please no," she cried out, thrashing against unseen hands. "Miss Valenti, Sophia," Vincent said, approaching the bed. "You're having a nightmare. Wake up." He touched her shoulder gently, and her eyes flew open. For a moment she stared at him in terror, then recognition dawned and she sagged with relief. "I'm sorry," she whispered, pushing herself upright and brushing tangled hair from her face. "I was back there at the cliff." "No need for apologies," Vincent said, stepping back to give her space. "After what you've been through, nightmares are to be expected." Sophia drew a shaky breath. "I keep seeing his face, the way he smiled when he pushed me." She wrapped her arms around herself. "I don't think I can go back to sleep." Vincent nodded toward the main room. "Fire's still going. I could make more coffee." In the soft glow of the fireplace, they sat across from each other, mugs in hand. Vincent studied Sophia covertly. Even in his oversized shirt, with her hair mussed from sleep and her face pale with exhaustion, she was strikingly beautiful. But there was something beyond her beauty that drew him, a resilience that shone through despite her fear. "How did you come to be in Silver Reef?" Sophia asked, breaking the comfortable silence that had settled between them. Vincent smiled faintly. I was passing through 4 years ago intending to head to California. Got caught up in the silver rush like everyone else. Worked the mines for a while, then did odd jobs. Now I hunt, trap, guide prospectors through the backcountry, whatever pays. You live out here alone, he nodded. Prefer it that way. Town's too crowded for my liking. And your family, a shadow crossed Vincent's face. Lost them in '63, raid on our homestead in Kansas. He didn't elaborate, and Sophia didn't press. I'm sorry, she said simply. They talked through the night, the conversation flowing more easily than either expected. Vincent learned that Sophia had grown up in Boston, the daughter of a scholar who'd filled her head with books and ideas that most would consider unsuitable for a young woman. She spoke French fluently, thanks to her mother, and had a passion for astronomy that her father had encouraged. He built me a telescope when I was 12, she recalled, smiling at the memory. We would stay up all night sometimes, charting stars. In turn, Vincent shared stories of his travels, the 2 years he'd spent with a Shoshone tribe after the war, the wonders of the unspoiled landscapes he'd crossed, the characters he'd met along the way. He found himself talking more than he had in years, drawn out by Sophia's genuine interest and thoughtful questions. As dawn broke, painting the cabin in soft golden light, they finally succumbed to exhaustion. Sophia dozed in the chair, and Vincent, unwilling to disturb her, simply draped a blanket over her sleeping form before returning to his post by the window. He knew trouble would come with the rising sun. Malcolm Reeves was not a man to leave loose ends, and now Vincent had made himself a target as well. But watching Sophia's peaceful face in repose, he couldn't find it in himself to regret his intervention. The sound of approaching horses woke Vincent several hours later. He moved quickly to the window, peering through the gap in the curtains. 3 riders were approaching from the direction of town, Floyd Decker among them. Sophia, Vincent called softly, moving to wake her. We have company. She blinked awake instantly, fear returning to her eyes when she registered Vincent's expression. Reeves' men, he nodded, already gathering his weapons. Get dressed quickly. We may need to leave in a hurry. While Sophia returned to the bedroom to change, Vincent assessed his options. He had his Winchester rifle, Colt revolver, and a shotgun. Enough firepower, but he was outnumbered, and the cabin offered limited protection if they decided to burn him out. When Sophia emerged, back in her dress from the previous day, Vincent had a plan. There's a root cellar beneath the cabin. Trapdoors under the rug there, he said, indicating a worn rug near the fireplace. If things go badly, that's your way out. Tunnel leads to a hidden exit about 50 yards into the trees. I'm not leaving you to face them alone, Sophia protested. Vincent's expression hardened. You will if I tell you to. These men won't hesitate to kill us both. Before she could argue further, a voice called from outside. Hawkins, we know you're in there. Send out the Valenti woman, and maybe we won't burn this place to the ground. Vincent recognized Floyd Decker's gravelly drawl. Stay back from the windows, he instructed Sophia as he moved to the door. Opening it just enough to make himself heard, he called back. The lady's not here, Decker. Rode out at first light with a message for the marshal in Cedar City. A harsh laugh answered him. Nice try, Hawkins. We tracked you both here last night. Mr. Reeves wants a word with his future wife, that's all. Funny way of courting, throwing a woman off a cliff, Vincent replied, his voice deceptively calm. Now ride on out of here before this gets ugly. There was a moment of tense silence, then Decker's voice again, harder now. You've got 1 minute to send her out, or we're coming in. Vincent closed the door and turned to Sophia. Get ready to use that cellar. Vincent, no time to argue. He pressed his spare revolver into her hands. You know how to use this. Sophia nodded, her fingers closing around the weapon with surprising confidence. My father believed a woman should know how to protect herself. Smart man, Vincent said with a grim smile. He positioned himself at the window, rifle ready. I'll try to convince them to leave peacefully, but I don't expect they will. The minute passed too quickly. Vincent caught movement from the corner of his eye, one of Decker's men circling toward the back of the cabin. He swung his rifle around and fired, the shot kicking up dirt at the man's feet, stopping him in his tracks. That's your only warning, Vincent shouted. Next one counts. The answer came in the form of gunfire, a bullet splintering the window frame inches from his head. Vincent ducked, then rose to return fire, his shot finding its mark in the shoulder of one of Decker's companions. The man cried out, falling from his horse. The firefight escalated quickly. Vincent moved from window to window, making it seem like there were more defenders inside. Sophia proved her worth, reloading his weapons and even firing a few shots of her own when one of the attackers tried to approach the back door. But their advantage wouldn't last. Vincent heard the distinctive sound of a shotgun being primed and knew what was coming next. Get down. He yelled to Sophia, diving toward her just as the front window exploded inward, showering them both with glass. Vincent covered her body with his own, feeling the sting as several shards embedded themselves in his back. The cellar now, he ordered, rolling off her and returning fire through the shattered window. This time, Sophia didn't argue. She scrambled to pull back the rug, revealing the trapdoor beneath. As she lifted it, Vincent provided covering fire, his rifle shots forcing their attackers to keep their distance. Go. Vincent shouted over the din, wincing as a bullet grazed his upper arm. Sophia hesitated at the entrance to the cellar. Come with me. Right behind you, he promised, though they both knew he was lying. Someone had to hold them off while she escaped. The look she gave him was filled with emotions neither had time to unpack. Then she was gone, disappearing into the darkness below. Vincent kicked the trapdoor shut and dragged the rug partially over it before returning to the fight. Through the chaos of gunfire and smoke, Vincent saw Decker shouting orders, directing his men to surround the cabin. Time was running out. Vincent checked his ammunition down to his last few rounds for both rifle and revolver. Making a decision, he fired his remaining rifle rounds in quick succession, forcing the attackers to cover. Then, grabbing a small pouch of black powder he kept for reloading cartridges, he hurried to the wood stove. He shoved the pouch inside among the still hot coals, then made for the trapdoor. He was halfway across the room when the front door splintered inward. Floyd Decker stood there, shotgun leveled at Vincent's chest. Where is she? Decker demanded. Vincent smiled grimly. Gone, and you're about to join her. Confusion flickered across Decker's face, quickly replaced by alarm as he registered the smell of burning powder. He turned to run, but it was too late. The explosion ripped through the cabin, the force of it throwing Vincent against the wall. Through a haze of pain and smoke, he managed to drag himself to the trapdoor and descend into the darkness below, pulling it closed behind him just as flames began to engulf the cabin. The tunnel was narrow and low, forcing Vincent to crawl on hands and knees. His injured arm throbbed, blood making his hands slippery on the earthen floor. The smoke from above began to seep through the boards of the ceiling, making breathing difficult. After what seemed like an eternity, Vincent saw daylight ahead the exit. As he emerged into the fresh air, strong hands grabbed him, pulling him clear of the tunnel entrance. Vincent. Sophia's voice cut through the ringing in his ears. I thought you weren't coming. He allowed her to help him to his feet, grimacing at the pain that shot through his arm and back. Couldn't let you have all the fun, he managed, his voice rough from smoke. They didn't have time to say more. The sound of shouts from the direction of the burning cabin reminded them of their danger. Decker and at least one of his men had survived the explosion, judging by the angry voices. "We need to move," Vincent said, forcing his battered body to cooperate. "My horse is in a lean-to about 100 yards that way." Supporting each other, they made their way through the trees, the thick forest providing cover as they retreated from the chaos behind them. Vincent's sturdy buckskin gelding was right where he'd left him, nickering softly and greeting as they approached. Vincent helped Sophia mount, then climbed up behind her with a suppressed groan of pain. "Hold on," he instructed, reaching around her to take the reins. They rode hard for nearly an hour, following game trails and dry creek beds to throw off any pursuit. Vincent knew these mountains intimately, every hidden valley and narrow pass, and he used that knowledge now to put as much distance as possible between them and Decker. Finally, as the horse began to tire and Vincent's strength waned from blood loss, they stopped in a small clearing beside a burbling stream. The sun was high overhead now, warming the crisp autumn air. "Let me see that arm," Sophia insisted as Vincent slid painfully from the horse. He didn't have the energy to refuse. Sitting heavily on a fallen log, he allowed Sophia to examine the wound. Her touch was gentle but confident as she tore a strip from her petticoat to bind the injury. "It's not deep," she assured him. "But you've lost blood and there are still glass fragments in your back," Vincent nodded wearily. "We can rest here for a bit, but we need to keep moving. Decker won't give up easily." "Where will we go?" Sophia asked, finishing the makeshift bandage. "I have a friend, Thomas Running Elk, who lives in a valley about half a day's ride from here. We'll be safe there for a while." Vincent glanced up at the sky, gauging the time. "We should reach his place by nightfall if we don't delay too long." Sophia moved to the stream, wetting another strip of cloth to clean the dirt and blood from Vincent's face. As she worked, their eyes met, and something passed between them, an unspoken acknowledgement of the bond forming in the crucible of their shared danger. "Why are you helping me?" Sophia asked softly. "You don't even know me." Vincent considered the question seriously. "Maybe that's why. I've known folks in Silver Reef for years, watched them bow and scrape to Reeves because he has money and power. But you stood up to him, risked everything rather than compromise. And now you've lost everything because of me," she said, gesturing in the direction of his burning cabin. Vincent surprised her with a small smile. "Just some logs and a roof, nothing that can't be rebuilt." "Still," Sophia insisted, "I'm in your debt." "No debt between friends," Vincent replied, catching her hand as she finished tending to his wounds. "We're in this together now." The journey to Thomas Running Elk's homestead was arduous. Vincent's injuries slowed them down, and they had to stop several times to rest the horse. By the time the sun began to sink toward the western horizon, they had reached a high ridge overlooking a secluded valley. "There," Vincent said, pointing to a plume of smoke rising from a cluster of buildings in the distance. "Thomas's place." Thomas Running Elk was a Paiute who had once saved Vincent's life during a blizzard. The two men had formed an unlikely friendship, with Vincent often bringing supplies from town and Thomas teaching Vincent the ways of survival in this harsh but beautiful land. As they approached the small homestead, Thomas emerged from the main cabin, rifle in hand. Recognition dawned on his weathered face, and he lowered the weapon. "Vincent Hawkins," he called in accented English. "You look like you wrestled a mountain lion and lost." Vincent managed a weary chuckle as he dismounted, helping Sophia down after him. "Not far from the truth, old friend. We're in trouble and need a place to hide for a while." Thomas's dark eyes shifted to Sophia, then back to Vincent, taking in their bedraggled state and Vincent's injuries. Without a word, he motioned them inside. The interior of the cabin was warm and smelled of cedar and sage. A woman, Thomas's wife Alina, looked up from her cooking, her expression changing from surprise to concern when she saw Vincent's condition. "Sit," she commanded, pointing to a chair near the fire. "I will tend to your wounds properly." While Alina cleaned and dressed Vincent's injuries with a mixture of herbal poultices, Thomas listened to their story. His face darkened when they mentioned Malcolm Reeves. "This man has been causing trouble for my people as well," Thomas said. "His miners trespass on our hunting grounds, pollute the streams with their diggings. He thinks he owns everything and everyone," Sophia added bitterly. "My aunt warned me about him when I first arrived, but I never imagined he would go this far." Alina finished bandaging Vincent's arm and moved to examine the glass cuts on his back. "These need to be cleaned thoroughly," she said, her gentle fingers probing the wounds. "Some glass remains." Vincent endured the painful process of having the glass fragments removed without complaint, though sweat beaded on his forehead by the time Alina finished. "You can stay here as long as needed," Thomas offered, pouring cups of strong, dark tea for everyone. "But this Reeves, he will not stop looking, I think." "No," Vincent agreed, accepting the tea gratefully. "He won't, especially not after what happened at my cabin." Sophia, who had been quiet while Vincent's wounds were tended, spoke up. "We can't stay here. We'll bring trouble to your door." Thomas shook his head. "My people have faced trouble before. We are still here." "Even so," Vincent said, "we need to think about what comes next. Reeves has too much influence in Silver Reef for us to simply return and expect justice." "My aunt," Sophia said suddenly, "she'll be worried sick." "And Reeves might target her to get to me." Vincent frowned, recognizing the truth in her words. "We need to get word to her somehow. Let her know you're safe, but also warn her." "I can help with this," Thomas offered. "My cousin trades with the settlements. He can carry a message discreetly." Plans were made over a simple but hearty meal. Thomas would send word to Madame Claire through his cousin, advising her of Sophia's safety and suggesting she temporarily close her shop and visit relatives in Salt Lake City until the situation was resolved. Meanwhile, Vincent and Sophia would rest and recover at the homestead while considering their options. Vincent was reluctant to involve the territorial authorities, knowing how corrupt many of them were and how far Reeves's influence might extend. After the meal, Alina showed Sophia to a small room off the main living area. "You sleep here," she said kindly. "Clean clothes on the bed. Tomorrow we wash yours." Sophia thanked her, overwhelmed by the family's generosity to strangers. When Alina left, Sophia sank onto the narrow bed, the events of the past 24 hours finally catching up to her. She had nearly died, been rescued by a man who then risked everything to protect her, and was now hiding in the home of people who had no reason to help her beyond basic human kindness. A soft knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. Vincent stood there, looking pale but determined. "Just wanted to check that you're all right," he said. Sophia nodded. "I should be asking you that. You're the one who got shot." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "I've had worse." An awkward silence fell between them, filled with unspoken words and emotions neither was ready to address. "Vincent," Sophia finally said, "thank you. Not just for saving me at the cliff, but for everything since. Most men would have handed me over to Decker rather than risk their life and home." "Most men haven't seen what happens when good people do nothing," Vincent replied quietly. "I learned that lesson the hard way during the war." He hesitated, then added, "Get some rest. Tomorrow we'll figure out our next move." As he turned to go, Sophia caught his hand. "I'm glad it was you who found me on that cliff." Their eyes met, and for a moment, Vincent's usual stoic expression softened. "So am I," he said simply, before gently withdrawing his hand and leaving her to her rest. 3 days passed at Thomas's homestead. Vincent's wounds began to heal, though his movements remained stiff and careful. Sophia found herself helping Alina with household tasks, learning about Paiute customs and sharing stories of her own life in Boston. Despite the circumstances, there was a peacefulness to their days that Sophia hadn't experienced since her father's death. On the 4th morning, Thomas's cousin returned with news from Silver Reef. Madame Claire had received their message and departed for Salt Lake City, but not before hearing troubling rumors. Malcolm Reeves had put out a story that Vincent had kidnapped Sophia and murdered one of Reeves's men in the process. A substantial reward was offered for information leading to their capture. "This changes things," Vincent said grimly when they gathered to discuss the news. "Reeves has turned the law against us. What will you do?" Thomas asked. Vincent looked to Sophia, including her in the decision. "We can't stay in Utah territory. Too many people will be looking for us and the law won't be on our side. Where can we go?" Sophia asked, trying to keep the despair from her voice. The thought of running indefinitely, always looking over their shoulders, was overwhelming. "California, maybe," Vincent suggested. "Or north to Montana territory, somewhere Reeves's influence doesn't reach." Sophia considered this. Leaving meant abandoning her aunt, her new life, everything she'd been building since her father's death. But staying put them all in danger. "Before we decide," Thomas interrupted, "there is something else my cousin learned. This man Reeves, he has enemies. Not everyone in Silver Reef bows to him." Vincent leaned forward, interest sharpening his gaze. "What kind of enemies?" "A man named Stewart. Owns competing mining interests. He has been gathering evidence of Reeves's illegal activities, claim jumping, bribing officials, using violence against competitors." "Edward Stewart?" Sophia asked, surprised. "He comes to my aunt's shop occasionally. A gentleman, always courteous." Thomas nodded. "My cousin says this Stewart seeks witnesses who will testify against Reeves. With enough evidence, he believes even Reeves cannot escape justice." Vincent and Sophia exchanged a meaningful look. "If we could help bring Reeves down," Sophia began cautiously, "we wouldn't have to run." "It's dangerous," Vincent warned. "Reeves would stop at nothing if he knew we were working with Stewart. More dangerous than running forever." Sophia countered. "At least this way, we're fighting back." The determination in her voice reminded Vincent of the moment he'd first pulled her up from the cliff's edge, that same indomitable spirit shining through despite her fear. "It won't be easy," he cautioned. "Nothing worthwhile ever is," Sophia replied, a small smile playing at the corners of her mouth. The decision was made. Thomas's cousin would carry a message to Edward Stewart, arranging a clandestine meeting outside of Silver Reef. Until then, Vincent and Sophia would remain hidden at the homestead, recovering their strength for the confrontation to come. That evening, as the sun set behind the distant mountains, Vincent found Sophia sitting alone outside the cabin, gazing at the first stars appearing in the darkening sky. "Counting stars?" he asked, lowering himself carefully beside her. Sophia smiled. "Old habit. My father used to say that when you're lost, the stars will always guide you home. Wise man." "He would have liked you," Sophia said softly. "He valued honesty and courage above all else." Vincent was quiet for a moment, watching the play of fading light across Sophia's features. In the days they'd spent together, he'd found himself increasingly drawn to her intelligence, her resilience, the way her eyes crinkled slightly at the corners when she smiled. "Are you afraid?" he asked finally. Sophia considered the question. "Yes," she admitted, "but not in the way I was on the cliff. That was terror, pure animal fear. This is different. I'm afraid of what might happen, but I'm not afraid to face it. She turned to look at him directly. Does that make sense? Perfect sense, Vincent assured her. It's the difference between fear that paralyzes and fear that sharpens. Their conversation drifted to lighter topics: childhood memories, favorite books, dreams once held before life intervened. Vincent found himself speaking of things he rarely shared, about the family he'd lost, the wandering years afterward when he'd sought to outrun his grief. "And did you?" Sophia asked. "Outrun it, I mean." Vincent shook his head. "You can't outrun grief. I learned that the hard way. You just learn to carry it differently after a while." As night fully descended, bringing with it a chill, Vincent noticed Sophia shiver slightly. Without thinking, he put his arm around her shoulders, drawing her closer for warmth. She tensed momentarily, then relaxed against him, her head coming to rest against his shoulder. They sat that way for a long time, watching the stars in comfortable silence, each acutely aware of the other's proximity, of the unspoken feelings growing between them. "Vincent," Sophia said eventually, her voice barely above a whisper, "what happens after? If we succeed against Reeves, I mean." It was a question that had been circling in Vincent's mind as well. Before meeting Sophia, his life had a lonely simplicity to it. Now, the future seemed full of complex possibilities, both terrifying and exhilarating. "I don't know," he answered honestly. "I guess that depends partly on what you want." Sophia lifted her head to look at him, her eyes reflecting the starlight. "What if what I want has changed?" The air between them seemed charged with possibility. Vincent found himself leaning closer, drawn by a force he couldn't name. Sophia's lips parted slightly, her breath warm against his face. The moment was broken by Thomas's voice calling from the cabin, announcing that Alina had prepared tea before bed. They pulled apart, the spell of intimacy shattered, though something had undeniably shifted between them. As they walked back to the cabin, Vincent's hand found Sophia's in the darkness, their fingers intertwining naturally, as if they'd been doing it for years rather than seconds. 2 days later, Thomas's cousin returned with Stuart's response. He agreed to meet them at an abandoned mining shack 10 miles outside of Silver Reef in 3 days' time. The preparations began immediately. Thomas provided them with fresh horses and supplies. Alina insisted on packing enough food for several days, unwilling to send them off without ensuring they were well provisioned. On the morning of their departure, Thomas pulled Vincent aside while Sophia was saying goodbye to Alina. "My friend," he said gravely, "I have known you many years. Never have I seen you look at anyone the way you look at her." Vincent glanced over at Sophia, unable to deny the truth of Thomas's words. "It's complicated," he said simply. Thomas laughed softly. "When is it not? But some complications are worth embracing." He pressed something into Vincent's hand, a small leather pouch. "A protection charm from my people, for both of you." Vincent accepted the gift with genuine gratitude. "Thank you, Thomas, for everything." "Return when this is finished," Thomas replied. "My home is always open to you, to both of you." The journey to the meeting place was tense but uneventful. They traveled cautiously, avoiding main trails and settlements, wary of the possibility that Reeves's men might be searching the countryside for them. They reached the abandoned mining shack with several hours to spare before the appointed meeting time. The structure was dilapidated but still offered shelter from the elements, and a good vantage point of the surrounding area. "We should rest while we can," Vincent suggested after they'd secured the horses out of sight behind the shack. "I'll take first watch." Sophia nodded, fatigue evident in the slump of her shoulders. The days of travel had been hard, especially coming so soon after their ordeal at the cliff and the cabin. Inside, the shack was dusty and bare except for a broken table and a couple of rough wooden chairs. Vincent cleared a space in the corner, laying out the bedrolls Alina had provided. "It's not the Grand Hotel," he said with a wry smile, "but it'll do for a few hours." "After the past week it looks like paradise," Sophia replied, lowering herself onto one of the bedrolls with a grateful sigh. Vincent moved to the window, positioning himself where he could observe the approach to the shack while remaining hidden from outside view. Behind him, he heard Sophia's breathing gradually slow and deepen as she succumbed to exhaustion. The afternoon passed slowly. Vincent remained vigilant, dividing his attention between the landscape outside and the sleeping woman behind him. Several times, he caught himself simply watching her, the peaceful rise and fall of her chest, the way a strand of hair had fallen across her cheek. He tried to remember when he'd last felt this way about anyone and couldn't. Perhaps he never had. The realization should have frightened him. Emotions made things messy, complicated, dangerous. Yet he found himself not caring about the risks, only about ensuring that Sophia remained safe, that she had the chance to reclaim her life and future. As the sun began its descent toward the horizon, Vincent noticed movement in the distance, a rider approaching from the direction of Silver Reef. He tensed, hand moving to his revolver, but the figure was alone and moving openly, not like someone planning an ambush. Vincent gently woke Sophia, who came alert immediately. "Someone's coming," he said quietly. "Just one rider, could be Stuart." They positioned themselves carefully, Sophia hidden deeper inside the shack, Vincent at the window with his rifle, ready to defend them if necessary. The rider drew closer, and Vincent could make out a well-dressed man of middle age on an expensive-looking bay horse. He matched the description of Edward Stuart that Sophia had provided. Still, Vincent wasn't taking chances. When the man dismounted and approached the shack, Vincent called out, "That's far enough. Identify yourself." The man stopped, raising his hand slightly to show he was unarmed. "Edward Stuart. I believe we have a mutual interest in seeing Malcolm Reeves brought to justice." Vincent glanced at Sophia, who nodded in confirmation after peering through a crack in the wall. "All right, Mr. Stuart. Come in slowly." Edward Stuart was indeed every inch the gentleman Sophia had described. Impeccably dressed even for a clandestine meeting in the wilderness, he removed his hat as he entered the shack, bowing slightly to Sophia. "Miss Valenti, I'm relieved to see you alive and well. There are disturbing rumors in town about your disappearance." "I'm sure there are," Sophia replied dryly. "Malcolm Reeves has a talent for twisting the truth." Stuart nodded grimly. "Indeed. That's precisely why I've been building a case against him for the past year." He turned to Vincent. "And you must be Hawkins. I've heard about your confrontation with Decker. Impressive work, surviving that." Vincent remained reserved, still not entirely convinced of Stuart's trustworthiness. "What exactly are you proposing, Mr. Stuart? Your message was vague on details." Stuart set his hat on the broken table and straightened his jacket. "Directness. I appreciate that." He reached inside his coat, causing Vincent to tense, but withdrew only a small notebook. "I have documented evidence of Reeves's illegal activities dating back 3 years. Claim jumping, bribery, intimidation, assault. What I lack is a witness willing to testify to attempted murder." "You want Sophia to publicly accuse Reeves," Vincent stated flatly. "Yes," Stuart confirmed, "along with your corroborating testimony. With that, plus the evidence I've gathered, we can approach the territorial marshal, a man, I assure you, beyond Reeves's influence. And paint a target on our backs in the process," Vincent countered. Stuart didn't deny it. "There would be risk, certainly. but I'm prepared to offer protection until the case is resolved. I have men I trust implicitly." Sophia stepped forward. "What you're suggesting could take months. Trials aren't quick, especially against powerful men." "True," Stewart acknowledged. "Which is why I'm also prepared to offer you both financial compensation for your trouble, enough to start fresh elsewhere afterward if that's your desire." Vincent and Sophia exchanged looks, a silent communication passing between them. Finally, Vincent spoke. "We need time to discuss this privately." "Of course," Stewart agreed readily, "but not too much time. Reeves grows more desperate to find you with each passing day. My sources tell me he's hired additional men to search the territory." After Stewart stepped outside to give them privacy, Sophia turned to Vincent. "What do you think? Can we trust him?" Vincent considered carefully. "His reputation in town is solid, and he has good reason to want Reeves gone. Their feud over mining rights is well known." "But using us to fight his battle," Sophia mused, troubled. "There's something calculating about it." "There is," Vincent agreed. "But his interests align with ours for now, and without someone like Stewart backing us, we have little chance against Reeves." Sophia paced the small confines of the shack. "If I testify, I'll have to relive that night on the cliff. Every detail." Vincent moved to her, stopping her pacing with gentle hands on her shoulders. "You don't have to do this. We could still leave, head west or north. Start over somewhere Reeves can't reach." The offer was tempting. Sophia could see it in Vincent's eyes, the promise of a simpler path, away from danger and painful memories. But running meant Reeves would win. It meant living forever looking over their shoulders. "No," she said firmly. "I want to face him. I want him to pay for what he did not just to me, but to everyone he's hurt with his greed and cruelty." Pride swelled in Vincent's chest at her courage. "Then we do this together," he said, "all the way." When Stewart returned, they presented their decision along with conditions of their own. They would testify, but on their terms. Stewart would arrange for Madame Claire's safe return to Silver Reef under his protection. The territorial marshal would be brought in immediately, not after a prolonged local investigation that Reeves could influence. Stewart agreed to everything, seeming genuinely impressed by their foresight. "I'll send word as soon as the marshal arrives. Until then, you should remain hidden. Reeves has eyes everywhere in town." "We have a safe place," Vincent assured him, thinking of Thomas's homestead. As Stewart prepared to leave, he paused, looking between them with unexpected warmth. "You know, under different circumstances, your story might be quite romantic. The brave frontiersman saves the lady from certain death. They go on the run together." He smiled slightly. "Perhaps someday when this is all over, you'll look back and see it that way too." After he'd gone, Sophia found herself blushing at Stewart's parting words. "He's very perceptive," she murmured. Vincent cleared his throat, suddenly finding the broken table fascinating. "He talks too much," he grumbled, but there was no heat in his words. The ride back to Thomas's homestead was quieter than their journey out, both lost in thoughts of what lay ahead. The decision to confront Reeves legally rather than fleeing had changed something fundamental between them. It meant considering a future, possibly, a shared one in Silver Reef, after the dust settled. Neither spoke of it directly, but the possibility hung in the air between them, as tangible as the setting sun that painted the landscape in hues of gold and amber as they rode. It was nearly dark when they arrived at Thomas's place. Elena welcomed them with hot food and concerned questions, while Thomas listened intently to their account of the meeting with Stewart. "This man Stewart," Thomas said when they had finished. "You believe he speaks with a straight tongue?" Vincent nodded slowly. "As much as any businessman does." His motives aren't purely altruistic. He stands to gain considerably if Reeves falls, but I believe he'll keep his word about protection and the marshal." "And you?" Thomas asked, his keen eyes moving between Vincent and Sophia. "What do you gain from this fight?" "Justice," Sophia answered simply. "And the chance to stop running." Later that night, after the others had retired, Vincent found himself unable to sleep. He slipped outside, drawn by the clarity of the star-filled sky. He wasn't surprised when, moments later, Sophia joined him, counting stars again. He asked, echoing his words from nights before. She smiled, the moonlight silvering her features. "Wishing on them, actually. Childish, I know." "What did you wish for?" Sophia's smile turned mischievous. "If I tell you, it won't come true." They stood together in comfortable silence, shoulders nearly touching. Vincent was acutely aware of her presence beside him, of the scent of her hair, of how natural it felt to be with her like this. "Sophia," he began, his voice unusually hesitant, "when this is over, when Reeves is dealt with, what do you plan to do?" She turned to face him fully. "Honestly, I haven't thought that far ahead. Continue working with my aunt, I suppose. Try to rebuild some semblance of a normal life." She paused, then added softly, "What about you?" Vincent looked out across the moonlit landscape. "I'll need to rebuild my cabin. Beyond that—" He trailed off, then gathered his courage. "Beyond that depends partly on you." Sophia's breath caught. "On me." "These past days," Vincent said carefully, "running for our lives, hiding out here, they should have been terrible. And in some ways they were, but they've also been—" He struggled to find the right words. "The most alive I've felt in years," Sophia finished for him. "Yes," he agreed, relief washing through him at her understanding. Sophia moved closer, her hand finding his in the darkness. "Vincent Hawkins, are you saying you'd like me to be part of your future plans?" The directness of the question startled a laugh from him. "I'm trying to, though not very eloquently." "You don't need eloquence," Sophia said, squeezing his hand. "Just honesty." Vincent turned to face her fully, taking both her hands in his. "Then honestly, Sophia Valenti, I can't imagine going back to a life without you in it." The confession hung between them, heartfelt and irrevocable. Vincent waited, suddenly uncertain, until Sophia's face broke into a radiant smile. "Good," she said simply, "because I feel exactly the same way." This time, when Vincent leaned toward her, there were no interruptions. Their lips met in a kiss that began tentatively but quickly deepened, expressing all the emotions that had been building since that fateful moment on the cliff's edge. When they finally parted, both slightly breathless, Vincent rested his forehead against hers. "We still have Reeves to deal with," he reminded her soberly. "I know," Sophia replied, "but now we have even more reason to win." The next week passed in a strange mixture of tension and contentment. They remained vigilant, aware that Reeves's men could discover their hiding place at any moment. Yet there was also a new ease between Vincent and Sophia, as they acknowledged their growing feelings for each other. Thomas and Alina observed the change with knowing smiles, but said nothing, respecting the privacy of their guest's blossoming relationship. On the 8th day after their meeting with Stuart, Thomas's cousin arrived with news. The territorial marshal had reached Silver Reef and was prepared to hear their testimony. Stuart had arranged for a discreet meeting at his home outside town the following evening. The time had come to confront their enemy. That night, as they prepared for the journey ahead, Vincent found Sophia sitting alone by the fire, staring into the flames with a pensive expression. "Having second thoughts?" he asked, settling beside her. She shook her head. "Not about testifying. About what happens after." At his questioning look, she continued, "Vincent, I've been thinking about what a life together might look like for us. I'm a city girl at heart. You're a man who prefers solitude in the wilderness. I'm not sure how we reconcile those differences." Vincent considered her words carefully. "When I built my cabin," he said finally, "I chose a spot 20 minutes' ride from town, close enough to get supplies and occasional work, far enough to have peace. It was a compromise even then. And now I'm willing to compromise further," he said simply. "We could build somewhere in between, not in the heart of town, but close enough for you to work with your aunt, to have the social life you're accustomed to." Sophia's eyes softened. "And you'd be happy with that?" "Happy is having both solitude and connection," Vincent replied. "I think we could find that balance together." The next morning dawned clear and cool. They set out for Stuart's estate with Thomas's blessings and Alina's provisions, both trying to project more confidence than they felt. Stuart's home was impressive, a sprawling ranch house surrounded by well-maintained grounds, situated on a rise overlooking Silver Reef in the distance. Guards were discreetly positioned at the entrance and around the property, a reminder of the seriousness of their situation. They were welcomed by Stuart himself, who led them to a study where a tall, weathered man awaited them. Marshal James Harker had the look of a man who had seen too much in his lifetime but hadn't lost his sense of justice because of it. The questioning was thorough but fair. The marshal took detailed statements from both Vincent and Sophia, paying particular attention to the events at the cliff and the subsequent attack on Vincent's cabin. "Miss Valenti," the marshal said at one point, "you understand that these are serious allegations against a prominent citizen. Are you prepared for the scrutiny that will follow?" "I am," Sophia replied firmly. "Malcolm Reeves tried to have me murdered because I refused his advances. I will not be silenced by fear of scrutiny." The marshal nodded approvingly, then turned to Stuart. "And you're certain about these financial documents? They prove Reeves bribed Judge Wilson and Sheriff Miller." Stuart tapped a thick folder on the desk. "Indisputable evidence, Marshal. Bank transfers, witness statements from the tellers who handled the money, even a letter from Reeves himself that was never meant to see the light of day." The marshal reviewed the documents carefully, his expression growing grimmer with each page. When he finished, he closed the folder with a decisive snap. "I've seen enough," he declared. "I'm issuing a warrant for Malcolm Reeves's arrest on charges of attempted murder, bribery of public officials, obstruction of justice, and a half-dozen other violations I'll sort out later." He fixed Vincent and Sophia with a steady gaze. "I'll need you both to remain available for the formal hearing. Can you do that?" They exchanged glances, then nodded in unison. "Good," the marshal continued. "Mr. Stuart has offered his home as a safe location until Reeves is in custody. I suggest you accept." He stood, gathering the documents. "I'll head into town now to execute the warrant. With any luck, this will be resolved quickly." After the marshal departed, Stuart showed them to guest rooms where they could rest and refresh themselves. "The marshal is good at his job," he assured them. "Reeves will be in custody before nightfall, but things didn't go as planned." As evening approached, one of Stuart's men rode in with alarming news. Reeves had been tipped off about the warrant and had barricaded himself in his mansion with several armed men, including Floyd Decker. The marshal was attempting to negotiate a peaceful surrender, but the situation was tense. "This could turn ugly," Stuart warned them. "Reeves is desperate now, and desperate men are unpredictable." Vincent felt a chill of foreboding. "We should leave. Your ranch is too close to town if things go badly." Stuart shook his head. "My men are well trained and the property is secure. You're safer here than trying to travel after dark." They agreed to stay the night, but Vincent insisted on taking watches with Stuart's guards. Despite assurances of safety, he couldn't shake the feeling that danger was closing in around them. He was proved right shortly after midnight when gunfire erupted at the front gates. Vincent, who had been watching from an upstairs window, raced to Sophia's room. "We need to move," he urged, finding her already awake and pulling on her boots. "Reeves's men have breached the outer perimeter." They hurried downstairs to find Stewart directing his men from the main hall. "Get to the stables," he instructed Vincent and Sophia. "Carson will escort you out the back way. Head for the marshal's camp outside town. He left deputies there while he went to confront Reeves." As they prepared to leave, Stewart pressed a small revolver into Sophia's hands. "Just in case," he said grimly. The night air was split with the sounds of gunfire as they ran for the stables, escorted by Carson, one of Stewart's most trusted men. They had just reached the building when a bullet struck Carson in the shoulder, spinning him around. Vincent dragged the wounded man into the shelter of the stables, while Sophia covered them with her newly acquired revolver. Inside, they found the horses already saddled. Stewart had prepared for this contingency. "Get out of here," Carson urged through gritted teeth as Vincent tried to staunch his bleeding. "I'll hold them off as long as I can." Vincent hesitated, torn between helping the wounded man and protecting Sophia. "Go," Carson insisted. "The lady is the one they want. You have to keep her safe." With a grim nod of acknowledgement, Vincent helped Sophia mount, then swung up onto his own horse. They burst from the back of the stables into the darkness beyond, riding hard for the cover of a nearby stand of trees. Behind them, the sound of Carson's revolver told them he was keeping his promise to buy them time. They rode for nearly an hour, pushing the horses as hard as they dared in the darkness, before stopping to assess their situation. "The marshal's camp will be watched now," Vincent reasoned. "We need another plan." Sophia pushed a strand of hair from her face, her expression determined despite the fear evident in her eyes. "What about Thomas's place? Can we make it back there?" Vincent considered the distances and the terrain. "It's a long ride, but yes. Though I hate to bring this danger to his doorstep again." "We need allies," Sophia pointed out, "and Thomas is the only one we can trust completely right now." The decision made, they altered their course, taking a roundabout route that would hopefully throw off any pursuers. The night was clear but moonless, making travel slow and treacherous. Several times they had to stop and listen for sounds of pursuit, but the wilderness remained eerily quiet. Dawn was breaking when they finally spotted Thomas's homestead in the distance. Relief washed over them, but it was short-lived. As they drew closer, Vincent noticed something wrong. There was no smoke rising from the chimney, no movement around the buildings, and parked in front of the main cabin was a familiar black carriage. "Reeves," Vincent breathed, pulling his horse to a halt in the shelter of a rocky outcrop. "He's here." Sophia's face drained of color. "Thomas and Alina, we don't know what's happened yet," Vincent cautioned, though his own heart had turned cold with fear for his friends. "Let me scout ahead." Leaving Sophia hidden with the horses, Vincent crept closer to the homestead. From his vantage point behind a fallen log, he could see 3 men standing guard outside Reeves's hired guns by the look of them. Of Thomas and Alina, there was no sign. He was about to retreat when the cabin door opened, and Malcolm Reeves himself emerged. He was a tall, imposing figure in an expensive suit, looking incongruously formal in the rustic setting. Behind him, being roughly pushed forward, came Thomas and Alina, their hands bound. Vincent's blood ran cold at the sight. He watched as Reeves spoke to his captives, too far away to hear the words but close enough to see the man's smug expression. Then, to his horror, Reeves drew a pistol and aimed it at Thomas's head. Acting on instinct, Vincent raised his rifle and fired. The bullet struck the ground at Reeves's feet, causing him to jerk back in surprise. The distraction was enough for Thomas to react, driving his shoulder into one of the guards despite his bound hands. Chaos erupted. Vincent fired again, striking a second guard in the leg. Elena managed to break free and run for the cover of the nearby corral. Thomas was wrestling with the wounded guard, while Reeves and the third man were scanning the surroundings, trying to locate the source of the gunfire. Vincent used their confusion to circle around to a better position, but his movement caught the eye of the unwounded guard, who fired in his direction. The bullet splintered the bark of a tree inches from Vincent's head, forcing him to duck back into cover. From her hiding place, Sophia watched the unfolding scene with growing horror. When she saw Vincent pinned down, unable to help Thomas as Reeves regained his composure and raised his pistol again, she made a split-second decision. Drawing the small revolver Stewart had given her, Sophia emerged from cover and fired. Her shot went wide, but it served its purpose, drawing everyone's attention to her. "Reeves," she shouted, stepping into full view. "It's me you want, let them go." Vincent's heart stopped at the sight of Sophia exposing herself to danger. "Sophia, no," he cried, but it was too late. Reeves's face twisted into a triumphant smile as he turned toward her. "Miss Valenti," he called, his voice carrying easily across the distance. "How convenient of you to join us. I was just explaining to your friends here the consequences of harboring fugitives." "Let them go," Sophia repeated, her voice steady despite her fear. "They're innocent in all this." "No one is innocent," Reeves replied coldly. He gestured to his remaining guard. "Bring her to me." As the man started toward Sophia, Vincent took aim and fired, the bullet finding its mark in the guard's shoulder. The man went down with a cry of pain, but the distraction had cost Vincent. The wounded guard Thomas had been struggling with had regained his feet, and now leveled his gun at Vincent's position. What followed was a desperate exchange of gunfire. Vincent managed to dispatch the guard threatening him, but took a bullet in his left arm in the process. Reeves, using Thomas as a shield, was backing toward his carriage. "Enough," Reeves shouted over the chaos. "Miss Valenti, I'm leaving with these two. If you value their lives, you and Hawkins will present yourselves at my estate by sundown. Otherwise—" He left the threat hanging as he forced Thomas and Elena into the carriage. Wounded and outnumbered, Vincent could only watch helplessly as Reeves's driver whipped the horses into motion, the carriage disappearing down the track toward Silver Reef. Sophia ran to Vincent as soon as the carriage was out of sight, her face pale with shock. "You're hurt," she gasped, seeing the blood soaking his sleeve. "It's not deep," Vincent assured her, though the pain was considerable, "but we have a bigger problem now." They retreated to the cabin to tend to Vincent's wound and assess their situation. The bullet had passed clean through his upper arm, painful, but not immediately life-threatening. Sophia cleaned and bandaged it as best she could with supplies from Elena's medicine cabinet. "What do we do now?" Sophia asked as she tied off the bandage. "We can't let Reeves hurt them, but walking into his estate would be suicide." Vincent's face was grim with determination. "We're not giving up and we're not surrendering, but we need help. Stewart, the marshal." "If they're still alive," Vincent said darkly. "But there's someone else, someone Reeves won't expect." Vincent explained his plan as they gathered weapons and supplies. Thomas had a cache of rifles and ammunition hidden beneath a loose floorboard preparation for exactly this kind of trouble. Among the items was a small metal container of blasting powder that Thomas used for clearing stumps. "This could be useful," Vincent remarked, carefully adding it to their supplies. By mid-afternoon they were ready. Vincent's plan was audacious and dangerous, but with Thomas and Elena's lives at stake, they had little choice. "Are you sure about this?" Sophia asked as they prepared to leave. "Your arm will hold," Vincent finished firmly. "Besides, I'm not the one taking the biggest risk." Sophia squared her shoulders. "I'm ready. Thomas and Alina protected us. Now it's our turn to protect them." They rode not toward Reeves's estate, but to Silver Reef itself. The town was unnaturally quiet as they approached, the residents keeping to their homes in the wake of the violence that had erupted the previous night. Their destination was a small, unassuming cabin on the outskirts of town. Vincent dismounted carefully, mindful of his injured arm, and knocked on the door in a distinctive pattern: 3 quick raps, a pause, then 2 more. The door opened to reveal a grizzled older man with a silver star pinned to his vest. Deputy Marshal Frank Tanner, an old friend of Vincent's from his days working as an occasional deputy. "Figured you might show up," Tanner said without preamble. "Town's in an uproar. Marshal Harker's been shot, Stewart's missing, and Reeves has holed up in his mansion with hostages." "We know," Vincent replied grimly. "2 of them are our friends. That's why we need your help." Inside the cabin, they found not only Tanner but 4 other men, deputies and townspeople who had sided with the marshal against Reeves's corruption. Among them, to Vincent and Sophia's surprise and relief, was Edward Stewart, sporting a bandage on his forehead but otherwise intact. "Miss Valenti, Hawkins," Stewart greeted them. "Glad to see you both alive. When my ranch was attacked, I feared the worst." Quickly, they shared information. Stewart had escaped during the attack on his ranch and made his way to town, only to find that Reeves had ambushed Marshal Harker during the attempted arrest. The marshal was alive but seriously wounded, being tended to at the doctor's office under guard. "Reeves has gone mad," Tanner explained. "With the evidence against him, he knows his days of power are over. Now he's just trying to exact revenge on everyone he blames for his downfall." "Which includes you 2 at the top of the list," Stewart added grimly. Vincent laid out his plan. It was risky, depending on timing and a considerable amount of luck, but it was their best chance to rescue Thomas and Alina while bringing Reeves to justice. "It could work," Tanner acknowledged after considering the details. "But you're asking a lot of Miss Valenti here." All eyes turned to Sophia, whose role in the plan was perhaps the most dangerous. "I can do it," she stated firmly. "I'm tired of running, tired of being afraid. It's time to end this." As the sun began its descent toward the western horizon, a lone figure approached the imposing gates of the Reeves estate. Sophia walked slowly but with her head high, her hair neatly arranged, wearing a clean dress borrowed from one of the townswomen. She looked every inch the proper lady, not like someone who had been fleeing through the wilderness for days. The guards at the gate tensed at her approach, rifles raising slightly before recognition dawned. "I'm here to see Mr. Reeves," Sophia announced, her voice steady despite the fear churning in her stomach. "He's expecting me." The guards exchanged glances, then one moved to escort her up the long drive to the mansion. Behind her, the sun touched the rim of the distant mountains, starting the countdown to the deadline Reeves had set. Meanwhile, in the growing shadows at the back of the estate, Vincent led a small group of men through a servant's entrance that Stewart had identified from his knowledge of the property. Tanner and his deputies would approach from the front once Sophia was inside, creating a diversion. The interior of Reeves's mansion was opulent, a display of wealth that seemed obscene in the frontier setting of Silver Reef. Sophia was led through marble-floored hallways adorned with expensive artwork to a study where Malcolm Reeves waited, a glass of whiskey in his hand. "Miss Valenti," he greeted her with a cold smile. "Punctual. I appreciate that in a woman." Sophia resisted the urge to recoil as he approached, forcing herself to stand her ground. "Where are my friends?" "Safe for now," Reeves replied, circling her like a predator. "Though their continued well-being depends entirely on your cooperation, and of course on Mr. Hawkins joining us as promised." "He's wounded," Sophia said, sticking to the plan. "The journey was difficult for him. He's coming separately, should arrive shortly." Reeves's eyes narrowed slightly. "How convenient. And I suppose I should just take your word for that." "You have me," Sophia pointed out. "Isn't that what you wanted all along?" A thin smile spread across Reeves's face. "Indeed. Though I must admit, my interest has soured somewhat given your treachery." Running to Stewart, testifying to the marshal such disloyalty must have consequences. Fear spiked through Sophia, but she maintained her composure. She needed to keep him talking, keep his attention focused on her. "It wasn't treachery," she replied calmly. "You tried to have me murdered, Mr. Reeves. What did you expect me to do?" Reeves laughed, a sound devoid of humor. "I expected you to understand your place, my dear, to recognize the honor I was bestowing by choosing you as my wife." "Honor?" Sophia couldn't keep the incredulity from her voice. "You call attempted murder honor?" "That was regrettable," Reeves conceded with a dismissive wave. "Decker overstepped his instructions. I merely wanted to frighten you, to show you the consequences of rejection. He took it upon himself to escalate matters." The casualness with which he discussed her near death infuriated Sophia, but she channeled that anger into her performance. Every minute she kept Reeves distracted was another minute for Vincent and the others to get into position. "And now," she asked, "what do you intend to do with me, with all of us?" Reeves's smile turned predatory. "Now, my dear, we negotiate the terms of your surrender, and then we leave this backwater town forever. I have interests in San Francisco that will welcome us." Outside, Vincent and his group had reached the servants' quarters where Thomas and Alina were being held under guard. Two of Reeves's men stood watch, but they were unprepared for the silent approach of Vincent and Stewart from the shadows. The guards were subdued quickly, with minimal noise. Inside, they found Thomas and Alina bound to chairs but otherwise unharmed. "Vincent," Thomas breathed as his ropes were cut, "we knew you would come." "No time for reunions," Vincent whispered, helping Alina to her feet. "Sophia's inside, distracting Reeves. We need to move fast." They had just cleared the servants' quarters when the diversion began. At the front of the estate, Tanner and his deputies approached openly, announcing themselves as lawmen with a warrant for Reeves's arrest. The resulting commotion drew most of the remaining guards to the front of the house exactly as planned. Inside the study, Reeves heard the commotion and moved to the window, his expression darkening as he saw the deputies approaching. "What is this?" he demanded, turning back to Sophia with sudden suspicion. "Justice," Sophia replied simply, dropping the pretense of cooperation. "It's over, Reeves." Fury transformed his features. "Nothing is over until I say it is," he snarled, reaching for the pistol on his desk. Sophia was ready. As his hand closed around the weapon, she drew the small revolver concealed in the folds of her skirt, the same one Stewart had given her, and aimed it steadily at Reeves's chest. "Don't," she warned. "I know how to use this." Reeves froze, then slowly smiled. "Do you really think you can shoot me, Miss Valenti?" "A gently bred lady like yourself. Try me," Sophia replied, her voice steady despite her racing heart. For a tense moment they stood locked in a standoff. Then Reeves made his move, lunging toward her with surprising speed. Sophia fired, the report of the small revolver deafening in the confined space. The bullet grazed Reeves's shoulder, enough to stagger but not stop him. Before Sophia could fire again, he was upon her, knocking the weapon from her hand and seizing her by the throat. "You'll regret that," he hissed, his fingers tightening around her neck. Sophia fought desperately, clawing at his hands, trying to break his grip. Black spots began to dance before her eyes as her lungs screamed for air. Then suddenly, the pressure was gone. Vincent stood in the doorway, his rifle butt still raised from the blow he'd delivered to the back of Reeves's head. Reeves stumbled forward, dazed but not unconscious. With a roar of rage, he charged at Vincent, who was hindered by his injured arm. The two men crashed into a bookshelf, sending volumes tumbling around them as they grappled for dominance. Despite his injury, Vincent fought with the strength of a man protecting what he loved. He landed several solid punches, but Reeves was a large man, fueled by desperation and rage. When Reeves managed to slam Vincent against the wall, aggravating his bullet wound, pain nearly caused Vincent to black out. Reeves seized the advantage, wrapping his hands around Vincent's throat just as he had done to Sophia moments before. "I'm going to enjoy watching you die," he snarled. Vincent's vision began to dim, his strength failing as Reeves cut off his air. He was vaguely aware of Sophia screaming, of movement in the room, but it all seemed distant, unimportant as his body fought for oxygen. Then, unexpectedly, Reeves's grip loosened. A look of surprise crossed his face, followed by pain. He staggered backward, revealing Sophia standing behind him, a letter opener clutched in her trembling hand, its tip stained red. The wound wasn't fatal. She had stabbed him in the shoulder. Not the heart, but it was enough to break his attack. Vincent sucked in precious air, pushing himself away from the wall as Tanner and the deputies burst into the room. "It's over, Reeves," Tanner announced, his revolver trained steadily on the mining magnate. "You're under arrest for attempted murder, kidnapping, assault on a federal officer, and whatever else we can think of by the time we reach the jailhouse." For a moment, it seemed Reeves might continue to resist. Then, as he looked around at the deputies, at Vincent and Sophia standing together, something in him seemed to collapse. The fight drained from his body, leaving only a bitter, defeated man. "You've ruined everything," he said to Sophia, his voice hollow. "I hope it was worth it." "It was," she replied simply, moving to Vincent's side, her hand finding his. As Reeves was led away in handcuffs, Stewart entered with Thomas and Alina, all three looking relieved to find the confrontation resolved. "Is everyone all right?" Stewart asked, his gaze lingering on Vincent's fresh bleeding and Sophia's bruised throat. "We will be," Vincent answered, his arm encircling Sophia's waist. "It's finally over." The aftermath of Reeves's arrest was chaotic but hopeful. Marshal Harker, recovering from his wounds, officially charged Reeves with multiple felonies that would ensure he spent the rest of his life in prison. Floyd Decker, captured trying to flee town, faced similar charges for his role in the attempted murder at Widow's Bluff. For Vincent and Sophia, the days following were a time of healing, both physical and emotional. They stayed in town at Madame Claire's home, reunited with Sophia's aunt, who had returned from Salt Lake City upon receiving news of Reeves's arrest. A week after the confrontation at the mansion, Vincent took Sophia for a ride outside town. His arm was still bandaged but healing well, and the bruises on Sophia's throat had faded to a pale yellow. They stopped at a gentle rise overlooking Silver Reef, with a view that extended for miles in all directions. The autumn sunlight bathed the landscape in a golden glow, softening the harsh edges of the desert terrain. "I've been thinking," Vincent said as they sat side by side on a sun-warmed boulder, "about what comes next." Sophia looked at him expectantly, a small smile playing at the corners of her mouth. "And what have you decided?" Instead of answering directly, Vincent reached into his pocket and withdrew a small object, a simple gold ring with a modest diamond that had once belonged to his mother. "I'm not a wealthy man," he began, suddenly nervous in a way that facing Reeves's guns had never made him. "I can't offer you mansions or servants or fine things, but I can offer you this, my heart, my hand, and a promise to spend every day making you happy if you'll have me." Sophia's eyes filled with tears as Vincent slid from the boulder to kneel before her. "Sophia Valenti, will you marry me?" "Yes," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "Yes, Vincent Hawkins, I will marry you." As he slipped the ring onto her finger, Sophia pulled him up for a kiss that held all the promise of their future together. When they finally parted, both breathless, Vincent rested his forehead against hers. "There's something else I want to show you," he said. He led her a short distance further, to a clearing where the foundations of a new building were being laid. Thomas and several other men were working on the site, but they paused and waved when they spotted Vincent and Sophia approaching. "What is this?" Sophia asked, looking around in confusion. "Our home," Vincent replied, his eyes reflecting his love for her. "If you approve. It's halfway between town and the wilderness, close enough for you to work with your aunt, far enough to have our own space. Thomas is helping with the building." Sophia walked slowly around the foundation, trying to envision the home that would rise from the bare earth. It was larger than Vincent's lost cabin, but still modest, sized for a family. "It's perfect," she said finally, turning back to him with shining eyes. "Absolutely perfect." 6 months later, on a bright spring day, Vincent and Sophia were married in Silver Reef's small church. Madame Claire had outdone herself creating Sophia's wedding gown, and Vincent looked more handsome than ever in a new suit that Thomas had insisted on providing as a wedding gift. The town had turned out in force for the ceremony, the story of their romance, beginning with that dramatic rescue at Widow's Bluff, had captured everyone's imagination. Even Marshal Harker had returned for the occasion, fully recovered and bearing news that Malcolm Reeves had been sentenced to 20 years in the territorial prison. At the reception held in the town square, Edward Stewart raised his glass in a toast. "To Vincent and Sophia Hawkins," he declared, "whose love story began at the edge of a cliff but has no end in sight." As the crowd cheered, Vincent drew Sophia close, his lips brushing her ear. "No regrets," he murmured. "About marrying a simple frontiersman instead of some city gentleman," Sophia laughed, turning in his arms to face him. "The only regret I'd have had would be not jumping off that cliff with you," she replied, her eyes dancing with happiness. "Everything since has been an adventure I wouldn't trade for all the comfort in Boston." "Even when Reeves's men were shooting at us," Vincent teased. "Even then," she confirmed, "though I'd prefer fewer bullets in our future adventures." "I'll do my best," Vincent promised, sealing the vow with a kiss that drew more cheers from their assembled friends. That night, as they stood on the porch of their newly completed home, looking out at the star-filled sky, Sophia leaned against Vincent's strong shoulder. "You ever think about how close we came to never meeting?" she asked softly. "If I hadn't gone walking that evening, if you hadn't been hunting in that exact spot." Vincent's arm tightened around her waist. "I try not to think about it. Some things are just meant to be, I suppose." He pressed a kiss to her temple. "Though I have to admit, catching you at that cliff was the best reflex decision I ever made." Sophia smiled, turning in his embrace to face him. "And catching your heart afterward was the best decision I ever made." As they stood together under the vast canopy of stars, the home they'd built together waiting behind them, both knew that the life ahead with all its joys and challenges would be richer for being shared. From the edge of a cliff to the threshold of forever, their story had only just begun.